So I finally got to watch Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the movie, on Netflix. So of course, being a Ninja Turtles fan, I wanted to talk about it. Even though talking about Rise of the TMNT is always an interesting thing to do with Turtle fans and on the internet, Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was the series that came out after the 2012 CG animated series. This version of Ninja Turtles features them being a little bit younger, a little more comedic, 2D animated, kind of a frantic animation style. Some 22-minute episodes, but mostly 11-minute episode shorts. Not as many of the classic characters, a lot of new mutants and villains. Some changes in various characters, different designs of the turtles as well as different designs of the story, this time having them have different weapons and mystical powers. Even though by the time we get to the movie, they've got the traditional weapons, but still with mystical powers. So of course, with all of these changes, some people are on board because they're like, hey, the turtles have already established a multiverse, so every version of Turtles is a different story. And other people, of course, were like, oh, it's different. Ah, my childhood, it's not what I grew up with, so therefore it is wrong. When I first talked about this series a while back, I gave it some pros and some cons. I really love the animation. I absolutely love the voice cast, and I think there's some great concepts here, but you could tell sometimes the series was getting a little stifled by having a number of 11-minute comedic episodes. And of course, when you have scenarios like that, you ask yourself, is that what they wanted to do, or is that what they were mandated to do? Because when they had longer episodes or really focused on a mix of the action and the comedy, I feel like that's where this series has shined. So that's why Rise of TMNT, the movie, is very interesting, because it definitely feels like hey, the series is kind of done. The studio notes don't feel as cramped on this one. It's being put on Netflix. Do what you want, and this movie does what it wants, and what it wants, it's freaking good. This is a really good movie. I do think the movie is probably one of the better things that Rise in general has had. If you grew up with the Turtles in the 80s or the 90s or the early 2000s even, I don't think there's anything about this gonna make you go, well, this is better than what I've seen before, but I think it is another version of Turtles that can be entertaining and fun. In fact, I think it's better than some of the other Ninja Turtle movies I've seen. I won't name names, but this one's higher up in the list. I know that some people get all freaked out at its style, but I'm telling you, one of the best things that I love about this series, and this movie even tops it more, is the animation. And this movie takes it up a notch. The animation in Rise of the TMNT is glorious. Some of the movie still looks like the actual TV show in style, but there are definitely some sequences in this where you could tell, oh man, Netflix was gave them some extra money. There are some scenes in this where the budget went up. There's a number of very cool action-packed fighting sequences in this, especially when they're going up against the Krang. It just gets bonkers. We get to see fighting with them when they have their mystical powers. Of course, in traditional, you need to learn a lesson in fashion. Their mystical powers go away. So we get some traditional fighting with them, and of course, when those powers come back stronger than ever, then we see it go all out. Obviously, it's an animation from a TV series, so some corners are cut here and there, but you can tell that they went all in on doing this the best way they can, especially with it being a Netflix movie. I always love the animation of this series and movie. Definitely some great animation stuff in this. There's some violent moments in this movie. Also, Leonardo says badass early on in the movie.
And a badass mystic warrior.
I was like, all right, Rise of TMNT is growing up. Ninja Turtles go, you are no longer. We see blood in one shot. I was like, oh man, when you get on Netflix, you don't play around. They're like, look, we got the Sandman over here. Turtles gotta come up. Also makes you wonder if this show continued, if this would have been one of those shows that started off all goofy and silly, but then over time it would have matured until it's like, oh shoot, this is all serious now. It's a Gravity Falls situation. Obviously the question is, do you need to watch Rise of the TMNT the series before watching the movie? I watched every single episode of Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles the series before I watched the movie. I had seen a number of episodes, but it was nice to see it in episode order all the way through. Do you need to do that? Probably not. There are definitely some references that the movie makes to the previous series, like them fighting Shredder. Their design in this looks like how it looked in the last episode of the series. All you need to know is that they have mystical powers. But other than that, it pretty much plays like a standalone Ninja Turtle story, probably even more so than the series it comes from. Even though it still has its signature style, Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the movie, feels very closer story-wise to something we would see in the 2012 series, or the 2003 series, or the movies, or even the 80s series, because it focuses on the Turtles, in particular Leonardo. Now, if you remember when the Rise of TMNT series was first announced, the big hoopla was about the fact that Raphael was going to be the leader in the series and not Leonardo, which makes Turtle power retroactively now be accurate. Raphael, he's leader of the group. But spoiler alert, if you watch the last episode of the Rise series, there's a very quick joke at the very end where Splinter just automatically announces, oh, by the way, Leonardo, you're now leader.
Oh, and Blue, you are the leader now.
Wait, what?
While this movie never actually references that, it definitely implies it a lot that Raphael in this movie is trying to transfer his leadership over to Leonardo, and Leonardo is not taking it seriously. It's funny because Leonardo is voiced by Ben Schwartz in this series and movie. A lot of what happens early on in this movie feels very similar to what happens early on in Sonic the Hedgehog 2. There's literally a truck that they have to stop of enemies trying to rob something, and Leonardo is not taking saving the day seriously, and Raphael has to have a talk with him about, even though you have these powers, you have to learn what it means to be a true hero. Very similar to what happened in Sonic 2. Stops that truck in Seattle, stops the bad guys, but messes up the town along the way, and Donut Lord has that talk with him about, even though you got these powers, you gotta learn how to become a hero, and Sonic is also voiced by Ben Schwartz. I just thought that was very interesting. Thanks for going along that ride with me. This movie is mostly about Leonardo. The other turtles get to shine, but this is basically his story of becoming the leadership role that he's supposed to be. So for anyone who was mad about Raphael being the leader in the series and was like, I think Leonardo should be the leader, then this is definitely the movie for you. The movie takes place at the beginning in the future, where New York City has been taken over by the Krang. The movie starts out with this epic sequence. The first 4 minutes you could actually watch online, where we see an older Leonardo and an older Michelangelo fighting against the Krang. We only see those two, so I can assume the worst for Donatello and Raphael. They've completely honed in on their mystical powers. Michelangelo is even able to open portals and go through time, which is going to be helpful because they decide to send Casey Jones from the future back in time to stop all the things that happened that led to the Krang taking over New York and possibly the world. The part where Michelangelo in the future opens the portal, I was like, is this movie gonna make me cry this early? Is this Rise of the Tmnt movie gonna make me cry, period? Dang, that part, woo! And then when Casey Jones gets thrown in, it's like, oh, why is this Rise movie giving me emotions? You're supposed to be making jokes and pop culture references and dabbing, and now you're making me feel things? How dare you, Rise? So yes, we do get Casey Jones in this movie. He's got his hockey mask and everything. He has a hockey stick, but it actually has like chainsaw blades on it. That was pretty cool. Also has a lot of tech that he got from Donatello in the future. And if you watch the series and you're a little confused because you're like, well, wait a minute, didn't the series establish that one of the foot recruits was named Cassandra Jones, whose friends call her Casey, so she was the Casey Jones in this version? Well, remember, this is a Casey Jones from the future. Cassandra Jones still exists in this universe, so do the math. If you're thinking the most obvious, it's the most obvious. Casey Jones meets up with April O'Neil, who's now in college at East Laird University. Nice play on Eastman and Laird, the creators of the Turtles, with their name. And she's getting a journalism degree there. I wish she would have had a Vernon and Irma classmate. That would have been great. Casey Jones meets April there, meets up with the other Turtles there. Of course, they do not believe that he's from the future until Splinter's all like, nah, man, Casey Jones spitting that truth. I know from our history of the Hamato clan that there were problems back in the day in Japan with the Krang showing up, pretending to be mystical beasts that then took over people. This was actually kind of implied in the series, because if you watch the series, it shows that a mystical beast that looks a lot like Krang met Oroku Saki and then gave him the armor that eventually made the Shredder. But again, that's all series. The movie is just about the Krang showing up and basically cause a lot of problems. So there's 3 specific Krang that are like the leaders. The first Krang is like the main Krang. He does most of the speaking, most of the planning, most of the world dominating. His sister Krang 2 is the warrior. She's always the one looking to fight or kill somebody. And the third Krang, their brother, is silent, but is devious, and usually is the one that uses his Krang DNA to take over other objects or people. Yeah, so that's the other thing about this Krang. They're able to connect themselves to other things and Krangify them and take them over. There's literally a point where they take over a train or a bus, but they also can do that with people. They can literally put their Krangness on them and turn them into beasts. There's a very specific sequence in this that is kind of horrifying. You just see people like screaming, you see silhouettes and stuff as people are turning into monsters because of Krang, and it's kind of crazy. It's not like super graphic or anything, but for an animated movie, I was like, this is a lot. The Krang start to take over. They want to bring in their big beast, the Technodrome. So of course it's up for the Turtles to become a team and save the day. And of course for Leonardo to learn his lesson about what it means to work as a team and to be a leader. Now, the comedy has always been the interesting part talking about this series, because I have no problem with a show being humorous. I mean, the 80s Ninja Turtle series is nothing but jokes, especially in the syndicated episodes. But sometimes I will admit that Rise of the TMNT gets a little frantic with their comedy, a lot of yelling, a lot of wacky looking and wacky acting, because you know it's trying to hit a younger audience. But where I feel the humor and the comedy always worked well in the series is when they had 22-minute long episodes, because it allowed them to pace out their humor, mix it in with their action and their storytelling, and everything felt very balanced, where sometimes the shorter episodes seem to have a lot of comedy, not really balance it as well with everything else. So that's why I'm happy to say that having a movie helps it even more. Yes, you get some of that wacky comedy that Rise of TMNT is known for in this, but it is definitely mixed in with a lot of action and also some heartfelt moments and dramatic moments. There's a scene where Raphael is talking to Leonardo about how he needs to rise up and be better as a team player, and it is not done for laughs. Leonardo, of course, is shrugging it off and says some jokes here and there, but you can tell it's a legit heartfelt conversation. You can tell where Raphael is coming from, and it kind of makes you even a little mad at Leonardo, like, dude, why are you being like this? There's a similar argument that Leonardo has with Casey Jones, where Casey is like, look, even if you are going to become leader, it doesn't mean you have the answers all the time. Listen to your team. There's a whole sequence where Raphael gets caught by the Krang, and they have to not only save Raphael, but you know, since the Krang likes to change different beings into their versions of what they want them to be better, as they say, to be more evolved, they're on that tip. So I guess you could probably imagine what happens when they get their hands on Raphael. And especially at the end when we're getting the big final battle between the Turtles and the Krang, especially with Leonardo and one of the Krang, it gets very, very heartfelt. Krang is really just like taking Leo out, and Leo still has that confidence and that hope, and the Krang do not like it. Work that grin off your face! There's moments where the Turtles are crying, there's characters having emotional moments. This is the kind of stuff that's really nice to see. It's not to say the series never had emotional moments, even though it was mostly comedic. There are definitely some episodes, especially when it got to the finale of the series, that got very emotional, but I feel like this movie was able to carry it even more so than that. And that again goes back to this cast. I just really like this cast of Ninja Turtles. Ben Schwartz as Leonardo, Josh Brenner as Donatello, Brandon Michael Smith as Michelangelo, Omar Miller as Raphael, Eric Bauza, voice actor supreme as Splinter, Kat Graham as April O'Neil. She does a really good job as that character, and I think it's Haley Joel Osment as Casey Jones in this, so that's pretty cool. I thought this cast was awesome. And I've heard the complaint, some people complain that all the Turtles act the same, and while I see where sometimes that criticism comes from, I feel like this movie does a really good job in very much establishing this is how each of these turtles are. Leonardo's a smart Alex, not taking anything seriously. Raphael takes things too seriously sometimes. Donatello is the brain to the point where he just assumes he's smarter than everyone in the room. And Michelangelo's that hopeful turtle. He loves art. He's the youngest one of the bunch, so he's the most naive. Those characteristics, which have always been there, I feel like that the movie does an even better job in making those personalities distinct. I also particularly liked how they made a lot of emphasis on Donatello having a soft shell. If you notice his shell is purple, it's a tech shell. It's because he's a soft shell turtle and he's trying to protect it because that would be his most vulnerable spot if he was in battle. And the movie does a really good job at emphasizing like how important that is. There's a couple of times where Donatello has to remove his tech shell and the other turtles, particularly Michelangelo, are worried. So that was a neat thing that they incorporated in the movie. You can definitely tell watching this movie that there's probably about 10 or 15 minutes that they probably wanted to have in this movie that either got cut for timing reasons or for budget reasons, but I feel like there's definitely more to a story, especially the future part of it. I feel like they probably had more to show what happened to the other turtles and maybe some of the other characters from the series. Could have possibly seen some more cameos from the series pop up in this, although we do get a couple. It's a very simple premise. Like, it's nothing super deep. So if you're someone older looking for something a little bit deeper, you're probably not gonna find it here. This one's just more action-packed and definitely has some emotion, but nothing too complicated. If you're not a big Ninja Turtles person, I don't know if this would grab you. You might like the animation, but I don't know if this will be like, oh, well, now I should watch Ninja Turtles. But if you are a Ninja Turtles fan and you particularly haven't watched Rise, I do feel like you could at least watch this movie. Just take it as a Ninja Turtles movie, a like direct-to-DVD Ninja Turtles movie that you would probably get if they still had those with Blockbusters or Suncoast video stores. If you look at it as that, just a multiverse turtle story that some other creators got to make, I think it can be fun to stand on its own. And if somehow that intrigues you to watch the series and give it a chance, it might be worth trying out. And I think we're at the point now where they have established many times, they established it in Turtles Forever and in 2012 series, that the Turtles has a multiverse, whether it's the cartoons, the video games, the movies, the comic books. This one is different from 2012, 2013, 2003, the movies, the Bay movies, the 80s animated series, the upcoming movie that's going to be produced by Seth Rogen, even the Turtles versus Batman, which that's a good one. If you haven't seen that, definitely watch that one. But yeah, man, overall, I just absolutely had fun watching this movie. It was just such a cool movie. It was just so cool to see Ninja Turtles go hard in animation like this, particularly 2D animation. This movie feels like it was probably something they were going to do in the series as a number of episodes mixed together, but as a movie, it stands out well. And anytime we get more Turtles out there, I'm always going to be excited for it no matter what. Kind of makes me wish that they would do 3 more movies. Like, I would love to see a movie that centers more on Michelangelo and another one that centers more on Donatello and one that centers more on Raphael. That'd be really cool. It's almost like they're one-shots, you know? I know there are just some people that just for whatever reason, they will never get on the bandwagon of even giving Rise of Tmnt some credit. So be it. But if you're not that person, if you're willing to have an open mind and say, even though I may have my nostalgia version of Ninja Turtles, I'm willing to see what a new version is like, I think it's worth checking out. It's pretty good.